Good. We rolling? I'm here finally meeting you. And to be completely honest, we met 15 minutes before now.
Yeah.
But I've known about you since, I guess, the first book. And we have every mutual friend in the world. And you are in my head every single day. As of tomorrow, it'll be 400 days in a row
That's amazing.
that I have done.
Yeah.
I have done waking up with you.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And this meeting of you now, and this thinking about interviewing you, has fucked up my meditation beyond belief. Because as you're talking, as you're telling me to pull back, and is telling me loving kindness, I'm thinking I'll have to ask him about this on the show, and then I have to use my thinking as a focus of my thinking, and you're screwing up everything.
Well, we're here now, so it's
I know.
your troubles are over.
I know. I should be able to just relax and just go into that. You are entirely responsible for me meditating.
Yeah, so remind me. So we had we've been pen pals by email for now a couple of years.
And you wrote out.
But did I reach out to you, or did you reach out to me about you starting meditation?
I don't know. You sent me very early the Spiritual Without Religion book. What's the title?
Waking Up. Yeah.
It's Waking Up. Yeah.
And my app is just a direct descendant of that book. Yeah.
And I was incredibly troubled by it. Incredibly troubled. I read it in, I think, most of it one night in the bathtub with insomnia.
Right.
The same time that that Bob Dylan's Frank Sinatra record came out. So Bob Dylan was singing Sinatra, and an atheist was telling me about being spiritual, and my whole world was crumbling that night in the bathtub. And the stuff that you wrote so beautifully about the split brain stuff, and the idea that we might have a part of us riding on board that we weren't aware of, my mind was blown. I wrote to our mutual friends, Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss, and I said, now, do we have to accept this? Sam Harris, and they said, well, he likes acid. Maybe that'll calm you down a little bit.
Blame it on the drugs.
Blame it on the drugs. And I had one of the things that confused me about your book was you talked a lot about. I don't think these are your words, but other people's words, of the monkey chatter. In the brain, there's a constant chatter going on. The talking to yourself.
Yeah, there's a term of jargon among Buddhists, the monkey mind.
Monkey mind.
The way your mind just jumps around from thought to thought.
And you use the example at some point somewhere. I've listened to so much of you that I'm not going to be able to give the exact citations, but the idea that we are so talking to ourselves. If we were walking down the street saying out loud what we're thinking, it would be clear insanity. Yeah. And yet we just take that as a given.
I mean, that's linger on that for a second. I mean, I don't think there's anyone who doubts that. This is such a strange thing psychologically, that if you just imagine your automatic thoughts exteriorized on a loudspeaker so that everyone can hear them, there's no way you would sound sane. And yet the fact that they're not exteriorized and you're the only one hearing them, that seems completely normal. And that's a very strange status quo.
Very strange, very strange. But what I was so taken by in your book was that it didn't bother me. And your book seems to really hit on how hard you were trying to get rid of that. And yet it wasn't something that had ever troubled me.
Right.
And so it was a real leap of faith for me to say, okay, well, I'll try to stop. You had a solution that I didn't have a problem for.
Yeah.
And I didn't know, and still, when I choose to let I have a little more control now. It's certainly not the kind of control I should have, but I have a little more control. I still very much enjoy being lost in my thoughts, and it's never been. I've never been someone very tortured by my thoughts. It's never been a torturous thing. It's always been a kind of pleasant thing.
It is strange that we simply do not have a capacity for boredom in the presence of our own thoughts. I mean, if you had a friend who was telling you the same thing over and over again, you'd very quickly notice the anomaly. But when you tell yourself the same story over and over again, it's just you're the best audience in the world.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
Do you know this this author Nicholson Baker?
Yeah.
Well, Nicholson Baker wrote a book called The Mezzanine.
Yeah.
One of my favorite books, and it's thoughts from a person entering the front of their building to the escalator.
Right.
It's 15 steps.
Yeah.
The whole book is every thought they have during that. And when he nails one of them, which he did several times, Nicholson Baker and I are the same age, we're both 64, which makes a very big difference with that book because the cultural references are going to be exactly right. And the character in the book, which is very close to Nicholson Baker, every time he sees vitamin C, every time he sees a bottle of vitamin C, without exception, in his mind he goes, living on Reds and vitamin C and cocaine, all a friend can say is ain't it a shame, from the Grateful Dead, which I'm not a Deadhead, hate the Dead, but every time I see vitamin C, that goes in my head. And it is incredible how often the chatter that I have is song lyrics, really constant. And I also didn't have, I mean, this is the... what I found so fascinating about meditating with waking up is benefits that aren't solving a problem. And that's so interesting to me. I mean, it's not, there's no sort of epiphany. It's not like, there's no like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm finally here. It's just like, oh, this is a little better. This is a little nicer. And most of your stuff in the book is not that gentle. It's a little bit more.
Well, there are epiphanies to be had. I mean, there are step changes that you don't come back from, and there are epiphanies about problems that you've had but haven't noticed are problems, or you haven't noticed their gravity up until that moment. And there's ways of becoming sensitive to the mechanics of your own psychological suffering, such that you realize, oh, this thing I thought was normal, or at least not starkly pathological, is actually, it's on some other spectrum a sign of mental illness on some level. It's like this is a normal variant of psychosis, and everyone, it's so well subscribed that we don't call it pathological. But the fact that we spend more or less every waking moment lost in thought, I mean, thinking without knowing that we're thinking, there is a real similarity between that state and the state of being asleep and dreaming and not knowing that you're dreaming. When you're asleep in your bed dreaming, you are in situations that are purely fictional and you're not aware of it. I mean, it's just, if you could get up and act out the content of your dreams, you'd be a total psychotic. The fact that you're immobile in your bed is the thing that makes this benign, but you are completely confused about the situation you're in. And when we're out in the world, in the waking state, thinking incessantly, having a conversation with ourselves, having a conversation with people who aren't there, rehearsing things, regretting things, anticipating things, and in every moment identified with each thought that appears in consciousness. I mean, each thought is an object in the field of consciousness, but it's not recognized as such. It sort of comes up from behind us and fully captures our attention, and we're just busy being identified with either a piece of language or an image or some kind of contraction of attention that we don't recognize. It is a state of, well, once you can break that spell with real mindfulness, you recognize it is a state of confusion that keeps reasserting itself on your attention moment by moment.
Now, I know that as atheists and so on, that this word kind of means nothing, but in terms of natural, we all, there's no separation between us and animals that matters. It's all just a question of evolution and design and finding that kind of not design, evolution and falling into niches and so on. Why would we have something that we can describe as psychosis, that we have to do something so planned as meditation to get out of?
Well, a couple of reasons. One is that evolution can't see or care about our well-being.
Of course.
Right? So, I mean, evolution has the only fitness function that our ancestors have had to track is any variant in their genes that allows for success in procreation and survival. Right. So that's the only thing that evolution is tracking.
So really nothing beyond 20.
Well, I mean, a little. Insofar as extended family is helpful, like you being around to help your grandkids,
right.
That's so that there's no hard cutoff there. But it does not see 99% of what we actually care about as civilized human beings at this moment, and certainly no sophisticated notion of what it takes to live an examined life or a deeply fulfilling one. There's also just the fact that language has been so useful to us as social primates that once it gets tuned up, it just never stops, and there was no reason for evolution to build us an off switch, right? So it was like so once you're a toddler who's beginning to understand the statements of the language users around you and define yourself in relation to them and you use language back, you begin to internalize this conversation, and you're then left talking to your quote self even when your parents are out of the room, right? And it never turns off until you actually inspect it enough deliberately.
So it's a quality of life thing that in no way impacts your survival, right? So that's the reason it wouldn't go away.
It may well impact our survival now, but not historically in terms of what could be genetically selected for.
Right.
No, I mean we've got tribalism and xenophobia and all of that had selective pressure on it. We've got in-group altruism, so that's the most rudimentary sense of ethics. But in terms of what it takes to live a sane life in a stable global civilization, we have to build the tools based on the fairly shoddy tools that we've gotten as apes. So so it's like anything else that you would learn in the 21st century that might massively improve your life. That can be hard won. I mean, if learning to play a musical instrument or learning to get in shape or learning to understand other cultures and to just take the best ideas of all the world's literature. I mean, all of that takes a lot of effort, and it can be immensely rewarding to do. And I mean, we have not been tuned by evolution to do that easily or certainly quickly.
Yeah. It's interesting because you're not really trying to fix a flaw so much as increasing a quality of life. Like musical instrument is not something that one needs to live, but one needs it to live. One needs to have a beautiful life.
Well, you are. I mean, the flaw is the actual mechanics of psychological suffering. So the question is, why do we suffer anxiety and regret and shame and embarrassment and anger, road rage, all of the relationship complexity and the career flame outs that come from negative emotion arising and essentially becoming an imperative to speech and action that winds up deranging our lives, right? So something happens in the world and you feel angry, right? Now, until you actually have a mindfulness practice, until you can actually watch anger, just the physiology of anger arise and pass away and see the associated thoughts arise and pass away and not feel the imperative to act and speak from on the wings of that emotion, which is to break the link between anger and action. Until you can do that, you are the mere hostage of anger, and so just however strong it is, however long it lasts, it will dictate what you say and do, right? And most people are living in that place, right? They actually don't have an alternative. Every thought that arises, it feels like me, and here's the angry thought, like, oh, that fucking asshole, I cannot believe he said that to me. And you're at the keyboard, or the words are coming out of your mouth, or in the most extreme case, you're actually getting into a physical altercation with somebody. And when you look at what's happening in the world, and all of the human misbehavior that leads to, virtually all of the needless human misery we experience, it is based on the fact that most people's minds are completely out of control, right? And as a tool for mitigating needless human conflict on the outside and the internal suffering for an individual, it's practically unrivaled as far as I can tell. I mean, there's just no.
It's also fun.
Yeah.
One of the things that one of the things that I never had a real problem with rage or excessive amounts of anger or any of that. But when I do feel an unpleasant emotion, I had never done that before going through mindfulness, and it's really fun to just go, oh, that's shooting through my chest.
Yeah,
that's what I'm feeling there. That thing's going through my chest, and to be able to be the observer of something happening in you is really fascinating, really fun.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed playing with that a lot as I got more. Because what I did was I read your book and went crazy, and then what was available to me, you sent me an MP3 or something, but I sniffed around at that time before Waking Up. The app Waking Up was out, and I ended up in Headspace.
Yeah,
and
which I recommended, I believe.
Yeah, and I did the whole beginner's course and all that, and then started doing the daily, and then when I chalked up. I was now at 1,400 and something days that I haven't missed one of the. And I had Andy in my head. Andy was there,
Andy Pucom,
telling me everything. And then yours was coming out, and I had a horrible thing because my loyalty, I completely attached myself to Andy, and yet you were the one that got me started. Yeah. So you then gave me this wonderful, peaceful solution, which was do both.
Yeah.
So now at night, I have Andy calm me down and make me happy about the world. And then in the morning I get up and Sam tries to drive me crazy.
Right.
Which, as far as I can tell, his is to make your life more calm and more pleasant. And your job is to drive people crazy, right? That's your goal.
Well, I mean, there's a slightly different goal. I mean, it
is a different goal.
I wouldn't say I'm trying to drive you crazy, but I am pushing for what I consider the most fundamental insights that are there to be found through the practice. So it's totally possible to approach mindfulness or any meditation practice as a tool of stress reduction, as a relaxation technique, as just another quiver to put. As another arrow to put in the.
And that was the stuff I kind of didn't care about.
Right.
I don't have a lot of stress. It wasn't a big problem for me.
Yeah.
But it was still nice. It was really nice. Right. That's why when you started digging around and giving me games to play with inside of my head, really great. So now I do 10 minutes of you in the morning and 5 minutes of Andy at night.
Oh, great.
And I want to expand that a little bit. But I want to tell you, what is the purpose? I'm going to jump around all over here because I just don't care.
That's right. I've turned you into a nihilist.
When you say for the last minute, what is your goal there? Because I find my major problem in meditation is stopping myself from guessing when the last minute is.
Oh, really?
Because from doing bits on television and from doing bits live, I really know where 5 minutes and 10 minutes are.
Yeah.
So I find myself going, the next thing he's going to say is going to be 1 minute left. And I say, how come this is pulling me out of the meditation every time at about 8.5 minutes?
Right.
And then the last minute is just, wow, I nailed it. I really do. He's good. Why do you do the last minute?
You're probably not the most common use case there. Because, most people don't have that kind of wiring, but for me, it's to give people because as you know, for most people, certainly in the beginning, the experience of meditation is of being lost virtually all the time. And then whenever I chime in saying, if you're lost in thought, come back to the breath, or I'm always catching you lost in thought, and you're occasionally catching yourself. and it can be frustrating. And so, to frame the last minute as a part of the 10-minute or the 20-minute session. And have you discovered you can do 20 minutes for on a daily, right?
Yeah. But I have to live some of the rest of my life.
Yes, that's all right.
Which I also want to talk to you about. I'm so fascinated by the idea of doing some sort of long retreat. But we'll talk about that a little later.
Sure.
Go ahead.
So I just want to give people a kind of permission to really start again for the last minutes. Like just here's just a minute, right? You can't screw this up too badly.
Yeah.
Just start again. And it really is just. The practice is always starting again. I mean, the moment you notice that you're lost in thought, and you come back to being mindful of anything, the next sound, the unraveling of the thought itself, the next sensation in your body, that's not a failure. It gets people in the beginning get frustrated by it, and they judge themselves, and the judgment is just yet another thought that they're not recognizing arising. That is actually the practice to break the spell yet again in that moment with another moment of mindfulness. So, it's an endless discovery of your own capacity to become identified with thought, and then to wake up. And so
it's really
it's not it shouldn't be frustrating. You just have to get over that very very early.
Yeah, I didn't have that much frustration. What I do have, is I can't. I know that you shouldn't be quite as hung up on not ever missing a day as I am.
Yeah.
But the only way I've accomplished it in my life is that I am ritualistic and habitual. And when I'm going to put a habit of eating Sam Harris every day, you can bet it's going to be every fucking day. Because if I miss one day, I'll never do it again. Yeah. It's as simple as that. I do everything. I do everything by habit. Yeah. And I have this really, I'm really interested in this kind of alternate reality. When I was in high school, as everybody goes through their period of heavy searching, I read a lot about yoga and meditation, which just would have been, early 70s.
Right.
So
it was in the air at that point.
It was in the air, yeah. And I tried some of it and came so close to really finding a groove there, and then rejected it and didn't come back to it. And I always kind of wonder, TM was around there, and TM was so bullshitty.
Yeah, culty, yeah.
Yeah, so culty and bullshitty. And also, and this is my prejudice, because I had the longest hair in my school and was thrown out for that, and because I played rock and roll music.
You can get thrown out of school for having hair that's too long?
You have a lot of trouble. Yeah. 72 in rural America, you could have trouble. Right. Because I was searched for drugs all the time, because everybody assumed I was on drugs.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you have a history of no drugs, right?
Never a sip of alcohol, never a recreational
drug. I want to ask about that.
Yeah, we got to go. That's where we got to go, because I want to talk to, obviously the alcohol discussion was covered by Hitch.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah. No doubt.
We talked a lot about alcohol.
You didn't have a meeting of the minds on
that.
But
for psychedelics, I think it's you, Rick Rubin and Joe Rogan are working together on me.
All right. You're being tag teamed.
That's the team there. Yeah. But my hatred of drugs and alcohol was so phenomenal when I was in high school, because I wanted to be the ultimate rebel hippie, and I just thought that drugs and alcohol were part of the status quo.
Right.
I was so straight edge, and when I went to the punk, I was so straight edge there. It was always a real part of my personality that I could be, I could do whatever anybody else could do on drugs. I could do sober. I could get into more trouble than the drunks. I could be more rebellious than the people that were tripping.
Well, so just walk me through the rationale for never taking a sip of alcohol. I understand taking a sip or several sips, and then realizing you just don't like it. But how did you draw the line before ever taking a sip?
We don't have. I don't believe I have access to stuff that starts this early and this deep. But some of the reasons I can see is I'm from a family of teetotalers that go way back,
right.
And most psychological studies will tell you that family use will give you a lot of information on
Right,
that.
right.
So I never saw, my parents never discussed alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
It was never in the house. It was never considered. My parents never talked to me about drugs because it wasn't even a real thing. It was just, my parents were much older.
Yeah.
My mom was 45 when I was born, so
Right.
much older parents, kind of raised by grandparents, kind of, which at my age, I mean, my mom would be 110
Yeah.
this month. She was born in 1909, and they just never talked about alcohol. So when I talked to Hitch about it, Hitch said when he pictured drinking, he pictured Winston Churchill.
Yeah.
He pictured grown-ups. I pictured the first 12-year-olds I saw drinking for the first time and vomiting. So there was no sense. I was also
Not
wasn't
not
sophisticated.
sophistication and power and
No,
success.
none of that. And also, I always wanted so much to be different. And I wanted, I was from a rural, big, dumb farm boy from rural Massachusetts. And all I wanted to be was from New York, Jewish, and gay. The only three things I wanted in life were to not be all the things I was. Also, maybe to be small. I just didn't want to be 6'7", the guy that Lenny Bruce would make fun of. I didn't want to be. And I kind of, Lenny Bruce was everything to me when I was like 12 or 13. And I kind of personified drugs and alcohol and thought that they'd killed a lot of my heroes.
Yeah, well, that was certainly true. I mean,
Hendrix,
the
Joplin.
downside was being well advertised,
Yeah.
especially at age 27. They all seem to kick off
Yeah,
at
yeah.
27.
Well, Hank Williams invented that like everything else.
Right.
He invented when to die.
Yeah.
And then it became, at a certain point, it became such a part of my personality, what I told people about myself, that it just became, and I also knew I have never, ever been good, nor do I respect moderation.
Right.
So when I got fat, in order to lose weight, I could not lose a couple pounds a week. I had to lose 110 pounds in 3 months. I always want to do things the hard way and the intense way.
Yeah.
And I knew that if I were going to do drugs, I would do them constantly in every way possible. Right. And it's interesting, perhaps, that the only drug that ever had any seduction to me whatsoever was LSD.
Right.
Well,
so I mean, one thing that is confusing for a conversation like this is we have this one word, drugs, which names this diverse class of compounds, and there are important dissimilarities between various drugs. So that the classic psychedelics like LSD and psilocybin and DMT and mescaline are not drugs of abuse. I mean, they're not addictive. There's no evidence at this point that they're neurotoxic. People don't take them every day. I mean, that's just not the pattern of usage, even for people who use them.
But what about, Skip Spence and Brian Wilson?
What happened to them? Remind me. Yeah.
Well, Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys took an awful lot of LSD.
Right. No, I mean, people. There are people who have taken hundreds of psychedelic trips, but they're not. You don't see the pattern of life derailment. So, okay, I should issue the caveat that some people lose their mind on psychedelics. Right?
Yes.
And there's some people who, the causality there is not clear because we're talking about people. There's some number of people who are going to be tipped into schizophrenia or some other psychological disorder very often around the time when people are first trying drugs, if they're going to try drugs, right? So if they're in their teens or in their 20s, and the causality there is not necessarily clear, but let's just stipulate that there's some people who shouldn't try any drugs or certainly shouldn't try psychedelics because they, let's say, have some reason to believe that they're prone to psychotic thinking. Mm-hmm. But all the evidence at this point suggests that they're physically very well tolerated, and the only the real risk with a psychedelic like psilocybin or LSD is that you can have a very scary experience. I mean, you can have a bad trip if you're unlucky or if you're set in setting or not right, and then that can there are people I didn't take psychedelics for like 25 years because having taken them for a few years, I got to, with uniformly good trips, I started to have some bad ones, and the bad ones were just as bad as the good ones were good. I mean, it was really, I was just bowled over by how unhappy you could be on one of these trips, and for an apparent eternity, right? So, so I stopped, and also meditation became a much more. I mean, it's a totally well-behaved tool to use. It's not like a rocket launch that is going to take you in some direction that you can't foresee. So I got much more into meditation, and also the specific insights that you're targeting in meditation are really just a subset of what you experience with psychedelics. I mean, psychedelics were incredibly useful for many of us to prove that it was possible to have a very different experience of being a conscious mind.
Well,
right?
One of the things I would often say, and I think I'm saying it because I remember saying it. I haven't thought about whether I think it's true anymore. But one of the things I felt getting out of high school, and notice I don't say graduated, but getting out of high school in '73, I felt that an awful lot of what was good about psychedelics had already leaked into the culture.
Yeah.
Like maybe a lot of what was good about Jimi Hendrix doing LSD
came out of his guitar.
Came out of the music, yeah. And I thought that I certainly, if I had been one of the pioneers, one of the first people to try it, I think I would have been very, very interested. But I also have the problem, you see, of it's also with the drinking a little bit. The first people I heard talking after they did acid were not the most profound, articulate people.
Yeah, you weren't with Aldous Huxley and
I wasn't.
and
No,
Albert Hoffman.
I was with guys
Alan
who were about to wrap their cars around telephone poles,
yeah.
and they also were indiscriminate. I did not know anybody who was doing psychedelics. I knew people who were doing everything.
Right.
And in rural America, 72, 73, the people that were smoking pot and getting drunk and doing acid and doing heroin were all the same people, all doing it at once. There wasn't sort of separate
so
groups.
there's a very bright line for me between doing psychedelics recreationally, the way you do any other drug, or the way you drink alcohol, and so therefore going to parties, going to raves, going to concerts, and just kind of blowing your mind with whatever drug is available, and using them as very precise tools for specific insights into the nature of mind.
Well,
that opportunity is actually there with the classic psychedelics. And I would argue it's also there with MDMA, which is unfortunately...
Which was your first drug, right?
Yeah. And unfortunately, you have to issue more caveats with MDMA because I think there is evidence that it is physically neurotoxic, and there's significant debate as to whether it is at the dosages that most people take, but it's by no means obviously physically benign in the way that something like LSD is, and it's also a potential drug of abuse. I mean, MDMA is something that people can take and take too much of and feel that they want to take a lot. There are very few people who want to take high dose psilocybin trips every day or every week, or that's not the kind of relationship to the experience that gets kindled.
That's very much. I didn't have in my world, which was living. I was a street performer, juggler. I guess you could say homeless. Living like Bob Dylan said he lived, but really didn't. I was hopping trains and hitchhiking and doing all that stuff, working carnivals. And the people that I was encountering were not the people who were doing drugs in a careful, controlled way.
Right.
I was deep. I mean, I was staying, at biker clubhouses.
Yeah.
So
I would imagine bikers and carnies are not the
they weren't the people to show me that. So I was kind of, and also who became later a very good friend of mine, Lou Reed, who used to always say to me, he was fast. I was once out with to dinner with Lou Reed, Iggy Pop, and David Bowie, and the four of us were having dinner, and Lou started the conversation by saying, this is Penn, they just seen my show. He's never done any drugs. And then the entire 2-hour conversation was David Bowie going, LSD? No, none. Right. And then Iggy going, did you ever smoke pot? No, none. Right. And they would just name every drug they'd done in their life and go, right. Really? And I was the freak show there.
Yeah.
I was the only one they wanted to. I was trying to talk about, what are you guys doing? What are you up to? No. What's it like to live life like this? But Lou Reed, had this wonderful thing that he would say about hating people in San Francisco. Because he said, in New York, when we're getting fucked up to get fucked up. And people in San Francisco pretending they're doing it for some sort of clear mental reason makes me sick. Right. Do fucking heroin, get fucked up. This LSD hippie shit, fuck it.
Right.
So I had that inverse point of view from Lou Reed going, if you're going to do drugs, do them like me. So I had no sort of.
Right. Well, you had some misinformation.
And then, I do have a great deal. I was. Joe Rogan is always there, going. It's right here in this box, Penn. We can do it right now. Joe Rogan makes the entry very easy for me.
Joe is good company. You can you'd be safe with Joe riding shotgun with you.
Yeah. So I don't really. I'm very, very interested in that. But my point of view about drugs was that at that time in my life, I probably made the right decision.
Right.
I probably had. One of the reasons I was able to be successful was that the people so much smarter and more talented than me got so fucked up. They cleared the way. Between religion and drugs and alcohol, they took out an awful lot of my competition. The guys I knew who were way funnier and more talented than me. I remember when I used to do Stern, I'd do Stern like 3 days a week when I was off Broadway in the late 80s. And you'd sit there with Sam Kinison, and he would be there so fucked up and still so good.
Yeah.
It was just, it was so humbling. You just go, man, I've tried to get a night's sleep. I have notes. I'm stone cold sober. He's fucked up. Man, he's funny.
Yeah.
Boy, is he good. Then people talk about state-specific learning, that if you learn to play guitar fucked up, you can probably play guitar fucked up.
I guess
that's why some of your
problem
jazz
was probably coke and alcohol, I would imagine.
Yeah. There wasn't a lot of that other stuff. So it's really, and I also tried when Teller had his back operation last year, I did 14-day water-only fast. I was interested in what you could find out there. Didn't have many mental changes there. Just
how hard was that? Was it?
Dr. Clapper, who's Michael Clapper, who's one of the real fasting experts, came to hang out with me. We were becoming friends. And
had you already lost the weight, or was this part?
I'd already lost the weight, and I just wanted to try doing more extreme stuff. And he was there to take, because after 3 days, if you want to be really careful, especially if you're older, you should probably have someone doing blood tests on you, injecting stuff to be safe. You shouldn't really fast over 3 days without somebody paying attention to you. And Clapper said I had the worst fast he'd ever seen. He said, you never, ever dropped into being comfortable. And he said, you still did it. And Clapper still carries on going, he wouldn't quit. But he never hit, like after 4 days it's supposed to get easy.
But this is never psychologically speaking, not in terms of your blood
values. No, physical.
Okay.
Physical. My body just didn't want to fast.
Oh, so your blood was shrieking?
And he was just watching, just going, you're okay, but boy, you could just stop now. And go to one of another opportunity. Teller's not going to get another operation. I never take time off. There's 10-year period, I took 1 day off in that 10 years.
Wow.
I like to work. So I'm not going to find another block of time. So let's do it, and let's do it right. So I'm really interested. I also talked to you when I had this 2 weeks, that actually a little longer, that Teller was going to be having his back operation. I talked to you about maybe trying to retreat, and silent retreat really interests me. All this stuff fascinates me, and finding out more about how I think and how I do stuff like that. And meditation is so nice because I can do it every day, and because it's that wonderful way of seeing problems solved that I didn't know I had. It's a wonderful feeling because I don't realize that something's a problem till I've solved it. That's the great thing about meditation.
Yeah,
You go,
yeah.
oh yeah, there was a lot of chatter, and now it's gone, and this is nice.
Yeah. So how long did it take you to actually connect with the practice where you felt like, okay, this is actually interesting and seems to be worth doing?
I am now.
I mean, there had to be a period where you're just sort of taking it on some kind of faith. Like, okay, Sam says this is going to be interesting.
Yeah, they were probably pretty short. I mean, it was weeks.
Right.
It was not months.
Yeah.
Probably 3 or 4 weeks where I just kind of went.
Did you happen to hear my podcast where I ambushed our mutual friend Richard Dawkins with a guided meditation?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, this
I used to listen to your
2 weeks
podcast
ago.
a lot, but now that
no
I'm doing
time.
the
Yes,
meditation,
that's
I can't listen to your podcast because otherwise, when you do the voice in the meditation, I think back on things you said in the podcast,
where I'm
and it fucks me up.
Railing against Trump or something. Yeah.
I go, no. No, did you ambush Dawkins?
Yeah, and it sort of went over like a lead balloon. He just did not see the point of it. You know, I mean, it was. Honestly, I don't know what would have happened to me had somebody put me in the same situation before I took psychedelics back in the day. I mean, it was like I was somebody who I think if you gave the technique to, and even the logic behind which it should make sense, I think I would have closed my eyes, basically stayed thinking with my eyes closed, not known I was just lost in thought continuously, and felt that there was just nothing to see. Like, it was just, I look inside and there's just nothing to notice, particularly of interest. And I don't know that I would have persisted with it. The thing, and I think I said this, starting to say this a few minutes ago, the thing that was so important for many of us about psychedelics was not that we needed to keep taking them, but having a serious kind of breakthrough experience on really any one of these drugs proves beyond any possibility of doubt that the possibilities of consciousness were far deeper and vaster than you realized. And just the mere memory of that puts the practice of meditation in a very different context, because then you know that there's a there, even if you can't find it directly in the first session, the fifth session, the 500th session. You've experienced this thing because you were just hurled into it for a period of hours.
And I can also learn from you.
Yeah, and so if you can take somebody else's word for it, well, then that's also
that's what's really fascinating. And I'm also really having I have not gotten once. And I don't want to negate the whole experience by saying this is what I'm trying to do again. So it's the scorekeeping becomes very difficult on this. When I started playing upright bass very late. I started when I was 45 years old.
Right.
And
had you been playing another?
I played electric, but
okay.
I hadn't played jazz.
Okay.
I mean hard bebop jazz when I started,
right.
And there, you can really use whatever you want to call it, willpower, habit, brute force. You can learn brute force. And I've always been able to get stuff done with brute force, always. And one of the things I wanted with fasting and one of the things I want with meditation is to be able to accomplish things without using brute force.
Yeah.
Because I have no problem with willpower and habits and stick-to-itiveness. I have no problem with that.
Right.
No problem with schedule. You know what I mean?
Right.
If you say, we got to get this done by next week, it doesn't matter what it is, I'll get it done. I'm able to do that. But I would like to be able to use fewer tricks. Bob Dylan said that his goal was to play guitar without tricks. And that quote is a really profound effect on me, because I'm really good at getting what I want by using all these kinds of tricks is the word, techniques that I've used to control my life. And what I wanted to do with fasting and what I wanted to do with meditation was find a way to just accomplish things without ambition.
Yeah.
and
Well, you can't.
it's been working. It's been working a little bit. It's
Yeah.
been nice.
Well, I mean, the real paradox of meditation is you actually can't
Right.
accomplish it in that way at all. It's
Which
like-
is why
like
it's
you-
so
you-
wonderful
yeah.
for me. And that's why when I say what I was about to say was it is antithetical to this,
Yeah.
because there was once, and just once, and I don't want to think about it too much or covet it too much, because it won't happen again, where I think I wrote you an email because I was very, very happy. I tried when I was looking at my visual field with closed eyes.
Right.
You didn't ask me to do this. It was during the, seeing your own head, imagining your own head thing. You didn't ask it in these words, but I just tried pulling back my field of vision
Right.
to behind me.
Yeah.
I just tried to pull back the consciousness. And all of a sudden, there was a different physical feeling. Physical is not quite the right word, but there was a different state. That's not even the right word either. One of the things you say in the meditation all the time is these things can't be put into words. You have to experience them. But it was really, really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Also, just to
but very rare.
explain that a little bit for listeners who may not be familiar with this. So the usual starting point for meditation and for just every moment of consciousness for an adult human is the feeling of being a self in the head that can then pay attention or fail to pay attention to the object of meditation. So mostly, if let's say you're given a technique to pay attention to the breath, you feel like you're a locus of consciousness up here in the head that can aim attention down at the breath, and you're trying to get closer to it. You're trying not to be lost in thought, but there is this sense of there's a one who is trying the whole time. There's a meditator. There's a subject in the head, and the goal of meditation is to look closely enough at that subject and see that it's not there, and then see that consciousness is just this open condition in which everything, including thoughts and emotions, and even the sense of the transitory sense of there being a subject, everything is just appearing on its own. Excuse me. So this technique, I mean, the one technique you referred to is the one that was really kind of invented out of whole cloth by this wonderful British architect named Douglas Harding, and he wrote a book titled On Having No Head.
Right.
And so his insight was, and he was looking at the Himalayas when he had this. He was just gazing at the horizon of mountain peaks and noticed that as he was looking out at the physical world, he didn't see his face. He didn't see his head, right? And anyone can notice this at any time. You're looking at me right now. The only face you see is mine, right? So where your head is supposed to be. I mean, you know you have a head conceptually, but as a matter of visual experience, you're simply where your head is. There's a world, and my head is in it, right? And so you're so if you look for your head, you can see that in its place, and that there's nothing to find in the direction you would be looking to find it. There's just this openness, right? And this is something that can be very vivid with eyes open, because we define our sense of self so much as with visual reference points. But you can have the same experience with eyes closed, where you look for the subject interior to the head. You feel for it, and you can see, you can for that moment notice that the feeling of the experience of consciousness is not in the head. Every sign that you have a head, the feeling of pressure on your face or on the back of your head, anything that can appear that signifies a head is simply an appearance in consciousness. Consciousness is still undefined and open and boundaryless in the presence of those sensations.
And that's it's wonderful with meditation that you can have so many benefits before you get to goals. That
Right.
just doing it is a benefit. I mean, if your goal is the elimination of self, or being able to see that without self. If that's your goal, it's remarkable how much real enjoyment you can get while not getting on your way to the goal. It's a really nice thing.
The goal, again, it is paradoxical. The goal is ultimately to recognize that that consciousness itself, and even totally ordinary consciousness that has not been transfigured by any surprising new contents. You don't have to have some upwelling of positive emotion. You can simply just be looking at your shoe, right? That consciousness is already completely open and unperturbed and at rest, and you can begin to savor that experience of just continually dropping back into that state. And the way we tend to live is that we're seeking experience, we're seeking pleasant experience, and we're seeking to avoid unpleasant experience, and we desperately want a pleasant stream of thoughts. We want a story that we're telling ourselves about our lives that is gratifying, and we want the story we want the story to come out of our mouths when other people ask us, how are you doing, what's going on, what are you doing next, and we want that all to sound great, right? And we think that if we can just gratify each desire as it comes up and get our relationships more or less in order and get our career in order and have this story get better and better, more and more of the time we will find license to actually land in the present moment and simply enjoy that, right? Like, you gratify the desire, the meal you've been looking forward to all day is finally here, and now you're busy having it, and what you really want is a quality of attention that can fully sink, it can fully arrive in the present moment without looking over the shoulder of this moment for the next thing that's coming, right? Hoping for what's going to happen in an hour. And people touch that briefly in peak moments, in states of flow or peak experience, whether they're having sex or you're having this meal and it's the first bite and you're really there for it, but then you're distracted by the conversation, or you feel too full, or something's happening, and for the most part our attention just kind of skitters across the top of the present moment without really sinking in, and meditation is a practice of ultimately becoming just more and more familiar with what consciousness is like when it's undistracted, when it's just actually landing fully in the present moment again and again, and then you recognize that that's actually the thing you want out of life. More like you have all these contingent plans that seem to be that are advertised to you as the necessary proximate cause of landing in the present moment. Like, here's a good enough reason to relax and be happy, right? And it's a mirage. It never really arrives. I mean, at a certain point, you just have to give yourself permission to enjoy your life moment by moment, and you even when things are hard. I mean, even when things are stressful, even when you're actually having to do work. You're having to get up early and stay up late, and you've got many irons in the fire. You have to figure out how to actually enjoy the process. You can't just be waiting for this all to be over.
That's the fun thing. The fun thing is really enjoying the physicality of unpleasant emotions.
Right.
But here's something that I think you're addressing this now, but I wanted to ask you directly. Every night before we do the magic show, I play upright bass. I play 45 minutes of bebop bass, which is jazz, during which I'm not talking. And the shows are ready to go, and I just do that as the people are coming in, just pre-show.
So are you actually on stage
for
this? Or okay.
But I'm not lit, I'm not featured,
Right.
I'm not introduced. I'm just playing the bass. And I've been playing bass now for 20 years. I'm better now than I ever thought I would be, but I'm not good. But I mean, I'm a good enough bass player to be able to cut 3 zeros off my income and play professional bass like that.
Right.
And 4. And when I'm playing the bass, that's when my mind will be really chattering. And I'll say to myself, I really want to be here and playing the bass. And what I wanted to ask you about was when you're doing something that requires a lot of physical memorization and, in many cases, reading music and following many rules that you follow in improvisation. Jazz improvisation is a rule-based thing, especially bebop. I'll find myself wanting to pull myself into that state that you talk about carrying into life and wondering how far I can go into that and still keep all my skills going. Yeah. Like how much of the chatter in my head is actually part of being able to do the skill I'm doing. And I don't know how to turn off